Hello and welcome to the Collective Conspiracy Show. Sorry if we've thrown a few of the regular viewers. It isn't a Monday night, it's a Sunday night, but the guest that we've got on was only free to do tonight. So, we thought we'd just change it up a bit and go with his availability. And the guest tonight is Eric Altman. Now, Eric is a big researcher into Bigfoot. And I have a short description here for Eric. So he's a Bigfoot researcher, a cryptozoologist, a field investigator, a paranormal enthusiast, a radio host and producer, and a conference and event organizer. So he has a lot to his name, rather a large CV. But really looking forward to it. Really looking forward to getting him on the show. He hasn't dialed in yet, though. I know he's in America and he's about 5 hours behind. So I don't know if there's a hold up there, but I haven't had any contact from him. But hopefully he does come on in a short time. But Bigfoot. So Bigfoot was a huge interest of mine. Really, since I got into the paranormal, since I got into crypto zoology, really, because people think that is just Bigfoot, and of course it's not. It's kind of anything outside of the normal where animals are concerned. So we have Mothman, we have the chupacabra, of course. The dog-like creature, I think that's down in, I think it's Mexico somewhere, that kind of area where that's spotted. We have all these weird creatures that are spotted around the world, and they fall into the cryptozoological category, really. And of course, what we don't get in this country is much of that. I mean, we have the big cat sightings. We have, where obviously people have looked after lions and tigers and panthers, let them go when they've got too big. And that's what we see. We get sightings of those out in the fields. Of course, we get sightings a little closer to home as well. My local town, Albury, there was a couple of sightings of a lion about 4 or 5 months ago now, and I certainly believe that it exists. I mean, there's a place near me where there was a Channel 5 or 4 documentary that was done on this guy. He had a host of lions and weird creatures, crocodiles, I think, as well. And he used to walk lions down the high street of this local town. We're talking ages ago now. I mean, probably 70s, 80s. He used to walk lions on leads like a dog down the high street of Cradley Heath, which is a place not too far from me. So it's not that strange to understand that these things do get out, or they're let out, and that's what's roaming the countryside. But we never really get anything in terms of big cryptozoological creatures here, such as Bigfoot. And of course, in America, it's a much wider phenomena. It's a much bigger phenomena because, I guess they've got more of the forestation, more of the woodland, and it's just a bigger country in general as well. Now, there have been sightings of Bigfoot type creatures in England, and we have kind of there are sightings, and in fact, I saw one probably last week, I think it was, where someone claimed to have seen one in some mountainside somewhere in England. And is it real? Is it not? I'm really not sure where to stand on that. A Bigfoot in England, but if he's in America, then why can't he be in England too? There's loads of questions I've got for Eric surrounding Bigfoot, and we'll save those just in case he does come on. But I always have a backup plan. I try to be as professional as possible, and I always try to have a backup plan because it is live. I do another podcast, which is the Paranormal Paradigm podcast, and that's not live. So that's pre-recorded, and of course, you have the joy there of setting up times with guests and really kind of re-recording something if it doesn't quite go right, or if somebody's late, it doesn't really matter. But with live shows, of course, it has a bit of an effect. So you try and have a backup plan. And my backup plan tonight is to talk a little bit more about myself, because I do realise that there are people that tune into the Collective Conspiracy Show who probably don't tune into the Paranormal Paradigm Show. And if that's the case, then you see me talking with Andrew or with Mark or with Bruce about all the things that we've spoke about so far. But I've never really kind of spoke much about my own experiences and my own kind of belief system and stuff like that. So I thought we could go into that. And I want to kind of open it up to the audience. And of course, this can all change again should Eric dial in at any point. If Eric dials in, we'll be sure to crack on with the original plan. But if he doesn't, we can just carry on with this. It's not a problem with me. So just going to go through some comments now. Nice to see some people joining in, some new people as well, some people I haven't come across before. Irene, I believe you tuned into the show the other night with Tim on Ghosted. Welcome to the Collective Conspiracy Show, Irene, all the way from Japan. Wow. Nigel, how you doing, Nigel? Hope you're doing well. What we got? So Irene's saying that they have the kappa, which is part human, part turtle in Japan. Wow. I mean, the thing is that places like Japan, they have these kind of, creatures that are like dragon-like creatures as well. And a lot of these creatures that we see, I believe, are kind of go back to, in my opinion, ancient aliens and the way that people used to see things that were happening, kind of back in ancient civilizations. They had to try and explain what was going on in their own little way. So when people show angels with wings, or they say that they saw these flying dragons, with fire coming out of their mouths or out of their tails, in my opinion, what they're describing there is they're describing a spaceship, or they're describing some kind of technology that they weren't used to. So nowadays we're used to things that fly. We're used to spaceships, and we're used to rockets and airplanes, of course, and drones now. But back then, they never had anything like that. So the way they could describe something was by using something similar. So a bird could fly. So what they did was they gave these beings wings to show future generations that they had encountered beings that could fly. And the only way they could think of telling the future generations that was by giving them wings, because that was the closest they had to something that could fly. That was a bird. So I believe that the reason we see these depictions of angels with wings, or we see these I guess dragons that can breathe fire, they were just spaceships really, that people couldn't describe in any other way. So that's a really interesting subject for me. What else have we got? Gary, good evening, young man. Hi Gary, how you doing? Happy with the Liverpool score, no doubt. Yeah, so it's looking less and less likely that Eric's going to show. It's a shame. I will try and get him back on, try and arrange for another time, but the show must go on, as they say. So if anyone in the comments section, or anyone watching, has any questions for me, it can be paranormal, it can be conspiracy related. The crazier the better, really. Throw some questions at me and I'll do my best to answer them. Really, conspiracy wise for me, it all started back, I mean, where are we now? 2020. So it all started back about 2011. I had a really bad accident with my knee, and I was wheelchair bound for about 3 months, and it gave me time to watch Ancient Aliens, actually, which I'd never heard of before. Now, I'd always had this weird, I'd never really believed in God. I'd read the Bible, but I'd never really believed in God. And I felt like some of the Bible made sense and some of it didn't. And then when I started to watch Ancient Aliens, it really opened up this, this, I guess, it really made me see how the Bible could be determined in a different way. And what that meant was that reading certain parts of the text differently to maybe see that it meant extraterrestrials, not God as in a man with a beard sitting on a cloud. And that was what I'd always had a problem with. And it really filled this, I guess you could call it, God-shaped hole in me, and it really made a light bulb go off in my head and think, right, this is it. This is the piece of information that I've been missing. This is what's not made sense to me, and now this does make sense to me. So Ancient Aliens really was the Kickstarter again into my passion of the paranormal, which I'd had at a young age, and then it really went on from there. I had this this huge passion reignited again. And as you know, when you're on YouTube, you watch a video of Ancient Aliens or whatever, and the next thing you know, you're watching a video about 9/11, how that was an inside job, and it just spirals out of control. 6 sleepless nights later, you got your tinfoil hat on, and the world's looking a lot crazier than it did before. And that's basically what happened to me. And as I kind of progressed through this, I guess, awakening, I understood very quickly that there was a lot of rubbish out there, and there still is, even to this day, surrounding the whole COVID thing, which we've covered no end on this show previously. you've really got to sieve through it. And to give an example of that, my dad is currently late to the party, shall we say, but he's slowly started to see the world differently now, how I see it, and how so many others do. And he's finding it difficult to sieve through the rubbish, really, to get to the good stuff, because there is so much rubbish there, and it's so easy to follow the wrong path down the rabbit hole, as the term is used. So really, once I'd kind of woken up, shall we say, I'm not really keen on that term, but once I'd woken up, a huge thing happened to me, and that's synchronicity. So synchronicity is for those that don't know, it's where it's coincidence, but on a different level. It's like uber coincidence. It's stuff that you can't really explain. And that's happened really for the past decade of my life, that keeps happening every now and then. And in my opinion, it's the universe telling you you're on the right path, you're doing the right thing. And of course, you can get bad synchronicity, and that's when it's telling you, you've come off the path a little bit, you need to get back on. So really, the synchronicity, and then that the synchronicity followed a very up close UFO sighting that I had, a very up close personal UFO sighting that I experienced with my brother, and we both saw it on the way back from a rugby training session. It wasn't long after I'd got back to playing with my knee, and we spotted this huge triangular craft about 1,000 feet away, 1,000 feet up in the air. Silent, not a sound from this craft. Left us both in tears. We're not ashamed to admit. And so from there, it really was just a whirlwind of synchronicity to where I am now, really. Just got a question here from Gary. What's your thoughts on Egyptians' pyramids and Machu Picchu in Peru? The Egyptian pyramids. Now, there's so many different, arguments as to what they are. Now, I practically got kicked off my archaeology A-level course when I was back at college. I remember I took archaeology because I had a fascination in things like this, as I say. And the the tutor, I remember, after the first year, got my mom in to basically say, he's a bit disruptive in class, and we don't think it's the kind of course for him. And obviously, my mom asked me why I was disruptive, and I'll tell you guys what I told my mom, that I didn't believe a word he said about Egypt. Egypt was a massive part of what we'd studied, and he was coming out with claims read from a textbook, classic school thing. They just read from a textbook. Half of the teachers don't know what they're teaching you. They just read it from a textbook, and that's how we get indoctrinated so easily. But, he was telling us that they were built 3,000 years ago. He was telling us that they were built in X amount of time. And at this time, I was really doing some studying into this. And I used to just ask him questions. There was no harm in it. I wasn't being nasty. I was inquisitive as to how he got the information that I hadn't got. And, really, when you think about it, I pointed out to him that the Sphinx has evidence of heavy rainfall on the Sphinx, which was last thought to have been in Egypt around 10,000 years ago. Now, if the Sphinx was only built 3,000 years ago, how does it have this evidence of the heavy rainfall? Then another question that I posed to him was, well, if you claim that they built the pyramids in X amount of time, some of these bricks, some of these blocks that they used for the pyramids were so heavy, 200,000 pounds in weight, things that we can now, but we do struggle to lift. Now, they would have had to have picked those up. They would have had to have, some of them have been known to have come from a mountain range down the Nile. So they'd have had to have put it onto a wooden boat. Think about the weight of this block on a wooden boat, sailed up the Nile, somehow moved from there to the pyramid, lifted up and put into place. Now, with the amount of bricks that are in these pyramids, he claimed that it was something like, one was put in place every 2.5 minutes or something. That's what would have had to have happened for it to be built in the time period he was saying. One of these blocks in place every 2.5 minutes. Now, these aren't little bricks, that you can throw up at your friend who's up on the scaffolding and he can just be putting them in place really quick. These are 200,000 pound blocks, some of these. How do they do that? But then you have to factor other things into play, and that's things such as the Nile flooding, which would take out a couple of months a year where they wouldn't do anything because the Nile had flooded, and all of their religious ceremonies where they wouldn't work. They were busy doing other things. So all of a sudden, that 2 minutes comes right the way down, and I can't off the top of my head think of the calculation, but it ended up being that one block had to be put in place in less than a minute each. Now, just think about that. That's nigh on impossible for that to happen. He told us that they moved these blocks on wood, logs, rolled them on logs. I mean, where were the logs from? They're in the middle of the desert. And, these logs, I struggle to run through sand, let alone be pushing these blocks through. And all of that to get one in place in under a minute, every single block. It just doesn't make sense. So I'm not so sure that the pyramids are a landing pad for a UFO. I don't think they were built to give energy or to recharge spaceships or anything like that. But I am a big believer in the fact that we still don't know what they were used for. They claim that they were a tomb for the pharaohs, but a body's never been found in one. They were all buried in the Valley of the Kings and stuff like that. You can't necessarily carbon date the pyramids because it's a brick. You can't carbon date stone. And I just think that they weren't built how we're told they built, and they're not for what we're told they're for. But it's other than that, it's impossible to say. And anybody that claims to know is, in my opinion, is telling fibs. Now, Machu Picchu, which is in Peru, of course, up in the clouds, that's a fascinating place. I mean, that's the place where we have these H blocks where people claim that it must have been laser cut in order to get the shape of them and the sheer cut and angles of them. The only thing that engineers nowadays can compare that to is laser cutting. Anything that's cut with a blade or with a saw leaves a rough edge, and it leaves an edge a lot rougher than what we have in these H blocks in Machu Picchu. So again, what were they for? How were they built? Was a laser used? We don't know. I mean, I am a big believer that there are ancient civilizations that were much more advanced than we are now. We have the Baghdad battery that was found, which was several thousand years old, which was evidence obviously found in Baghdad. It was evidence. It was a jar with a copper kind of pole in, and it was evidence that it generated a specific voltage, very, very, very low, very minimal. But it was a battery. It was generating a voltage. And that, this is several thousand years old. And if you look at some of the Egyptian hieroglyphs, what claim to be eggplants or aubergines do look very similar to bulbs, with the filament running through and even have a plug on the end. So it's interesting when you look at things like that. So yeah, that's my thoughts there, Gary. That, I can't quite see why an extraterrestrial race would come down to Earth to just to build a few pyramids and then go away again. But I do think there's a huge mystery surrounding why they're built, because what they tell us and teach us, first-hand experience of that at college, just doesn't make sense. Ian Mason, good evening. Hi, Ian. Thank you for joining us. For the people that are joining us, if you've joined late, obviously this is billed as having Eric on to come on and discuss Bigfoot and cryptozoology. Unfortunately, Eric hasn't shown up yet. Had no contact from him. Hopefully he's okay, and hopefully we'll get him back on. When in a time that better suits him. He might come on any minute now. I don't know. If he does, we'll be sure to crack on with the interview. But until then, if anyone has any questions regarding conspiracies or paranormal, just throw them out there, and I'll do my best to answer them. Gary, what have we got? When I investigated Leeds Museum, the mummy in there was sending out unbelievable energy. I was fixated. I couldn't leave the room. I'd like to go back there soon. That sounds fascinating, Gary. I mean, for someone with a talent like yourself and the mediumship, that is certainly an angle that maybe hasn't been utilised that much when it comes to mummies and these kind of ancient places, really, to get a medium involved to see what energies they're picking up on, because of course these civilizations were hugely spiritual, a lot closer to the spiritual side than we are now, and we believe we're at the cutting edge of technology, and unfortunately we're taking away that spiritual side of us. And because we have our heads buried in Instagram all day or Facebook, or we're plugged up to our VR goggles or our VR glasses, and we're slowly coming away from the spiritual side and merging with the artificial intelligence side. And that's a very bad thing to do, in my opinion. And of course, you look at other things that are around that are blocking the connection to the spiritual side, and that's things such as Wi-Fi and frequencies and energies, 3G, 4G, 5G, the Wi-Fi, the internet, people charging their phones before they go to sleep, people on their phones as they fall asleep. Everything around us now is being bombarded with these energies, these negative frequencies, and it's going to have an effect on us as biological beings. It's going to have an effect on us, and we just need to be careful of that, I think, because it does prevent us from contacting the spiritual side of us. Gary, there's been water footprints behind the sealed locked temp room, and it was unexplained where the water footprints had come from. As it's sealed temp room, it had to remain in. Also, is this are you talking about the, I don't know what it's called, the coffin, I guess, that the mummy was in? They found footprints behind it. That's interesting. I wonder if it was related to the mummy. Okay. So really I had the UFO experience. Going to be bouncing around a little bit here. Had the UFO experience, and then kind of went on my first ghost hunt with a rather big group, big franchise, and it was okay. And I'm sure people that watch this show or have seen my other interviews are aware of my opinions on these big franchised groups. But there was a lot of negatives, and then I finally found a group that did things how I wanted them to do it, and it was great. It was fantastic. And I kind of settled with them, and for a few years went on regular investigations with them, made good friends, and things died down eventually. And of course, we don't investigate that often now, and we don't investigate at all now for obvious reasons. But yeah, then so once that happened, and once it slowed down a bit, I had another bunch of friends that I would go out on investigations with, and it's just been a roller coaster really for the last 10 years for me on a spiritual level, on a research level. It's really been interesting. Now, the biggest thing that has kind of run throughout my research and throughout my 10-year journey, shall we say, is my research into the nature of reality, and that is our surroundings. And apologies to anyone that's watching that may have heard this before, but I do realise there are people that haven't. So I've really tried to, not tried as in falsified evidence, because that's wrong, but I've really tried to fit my theory and the evidence together, because I strongly believe that what we experience when we call it paranormal, whether that be Bigfoot, whether that be a spirit or an alien, I really believe that what we're experiencing is interdimensional. And by that, I mean they're operating on frequencies outside of our perceptive range. So we are literally biological vessels with a data attention point, which is our brain. And all that does all day, every day, like a radio receiver, is it brings in signals, it decodes those signals, whether that be through the eyes, whether that be through the ears. It decodes those signals, those vibrational energies, those frequencies. It decodes them, makes us understand it in a better way, so we can perceive the world exactly how we do. Now, what that means is everything in the world is emitting a frequency. It's everything that you can see around you now, whether you can touch it or feel it. Everything has, it's a bunch of atoms essentially vibrating to a particular frequency in order to exist. Now, you can change that frequency, you can smash it up, you can break it. We've all seen cymatics where they change the frequency on a vibrating table, and it makes the sand go into another pretty symmetrical pattern, and then change the frequency again, and it changes shape again. Fascinating. If no one's ever seen that, just go onto YouTube or whatever and search for cymatics. It's absolutely fascinating. And what that means is everything's just vibrating to a frequency in order to exist. And we can't destroy energy. We can burn stuff, we can break stuff, we can smash stuff, but the energy, the frequency that is contained within that item just goes somewhere else. And that's what happens when we die, because ultimately the biological vessel will wither and die. It will age. It will, it will no longer function. That's what happens. But the consciousness that's inside us, whether people can call that a spirit, some people call it a soul, or consciousness for me, that has to go somewhere now because it's released. And while it's contained within this biological vessel, what that means is we can only experience a reality that is within the five sense reality, that's within what we call visible light, because that's all our body will allow our consciousness to experience. Now, the visible light, there's been further studies done. People believed it was about 0.05% of the light spectrum, but people now think it's 0.035% of the light spectrum, so even less. So that means 99.9% of the light spectrum, and that contains things such as X-ray, infrared, ultraviolet, we can't see, we can't interact with, we can't perceive. So think about it now, where you're sat, where you're watching this, look around you. There's 99.9, roughly, percent of the world, of the universe, that you can't see. So you could be in a room with, like I am, with some sofas and a TV and whatever, but that's only occupying a fraction of what is actually here. That doesn't mean it's not here just because I can't see it. My TV's off. That doesn't mean that, Sky Sports is no longer playing. Of course it's still playing. I'm just not tuning into it on the TV. And that's what's happening with us. We're not tuning in to these frequencies because we can't. We can't when we're trapped within this body. Now, there are people like Gary, and there are people like, these mediums and psychics that can. They have an ability to, have the TV off and still watch Sky Sports at the same time. And that's a fantastic talent to have. And people can do that. But the majority of people can't. And that's because of our body. Now, once we die and our consciousness is released, we can now vibrate on a lot more of a frequency range than we were able to before we died. And what that means is we can now interact with these other realms. We can interact with these other entities. And I always use a block of flats as an analogy. So if we're living on one floor, above us you might have Bigfoot, and below us you might have aliens, and ghosts are up on the top floor somewhere. And ultimately, you can't interact with each other because you're on different floors. But they're there because you hear them. They move the furniture around, or their music's too loud on a Friday night. You might pass each other in the corridor, or you might see someone walking outside downstairs. But that's it. Apart from that, you can't interact with each other because you're on different levels. And that's what's going on here. We're in a 5 sense reality that's occupying 0.035% of the light spectrum, of the frequency range. So much is happening that we can't interact with. So we've had to develop, when it comes to paranormal investigating, tools and equipment to enable us to see outside of this range. So we have ultraviolet torches. Think about the ultraviolet torch for a very simple analogy of this. If you shine that in your kitchen, I always say don't do it in front of your wife or your mum. If you shine it in your kitchen, they think they've got a lovely clean kitchen, and they probably haven't. But just don't do it when they're around. But if you shine it, it shows up stains that you can't see with your eyes. Now, if you were to just look in your kitchen, you go, yeah, it's clean. There's nothing on that surface at all. But now you just shine a torch, and it now allows you to just step up a gear into and to perceive another part of the frequency range that you can't with your human eye. Now, all of a sudden, you're seeing things that were never there before. It wasn't there before, and now it is. You've opened up a whole new world of visions simply by turning a torch on. And that's what's happening, obviously, on a much deeper level. Very simple analogy there. But what we've done is we've developed these tools, infrared cameras, fantastic pieces of equipment in order to see things outside of our visible frequency range. EVP recorders that can pick up recordings that the human ear can't because of the decibel range that we can only perceive. And then that's kind of on a general level, but then it breaks down to an even more personal level. I've spent years behind a drum kit, so my hearing isn't that great. And of course, the older generations that tend to come on to ghost hunts, their hearing might not be great. So there's even fluctuations within what we can hear, if that makes sense. And that's, this is the other interesting thing, because people say to me, well, if we're essentially creating our own world, if we're perceiving it how we want to perceive it, then why can we both see that car there? It's like, well, yeah, we can both see that car because it's essentially a frequency range. It's an object that's emitting frequencies, and we're decoding it. Now, someone might see that car as red or orange or whatever color, but someone else, probably who is what we would call colorblind, sees it in a completely different color. Now, who's right? Does that mean they're right because they're seeing it as grey? Or am I right because I'm seeing it as green? Nobody's right, but in their universe, in their perceptive world, it's a different color to what I'm seeing. And I always try and use that when we talk about spirits. So many people see spirits when they're stood next to their friend who isn't seeing a thing. They can't see anything, but their friend is having a full-on, kind of experience, seeing a full manifestation or a shadow or whatever, and can't believe that the person stood right next to them isn't seeing this. And it's just about perception. It's about what you've opened up to. It's about what your particular equipment, i.e. your brain, can see. My wife doesn't have a digital radio in her car, so she can't listen to the radio stations that I listen to. Doesn't mean they're not there. She just hasn't got the equipment to tune into it. So it's a fascinating way of looking at the paranormal. So I tried to bring the nature of reality and that research into my research into the paranormal. And the more I did, the more it just kept ticking box after box after box. One of the very first experiences I ever had was we had a recording. So something happened to me, and I had a bit of an attack on me whilst doing a human pendulum, and I got took out of that room into another room. And while we were in that room, I was with another guy, and he was trying to calm me down. And while we were there was a growl behind me. I'm not going to do it, but it was very animalistic. It was very evil sounding, this growl. And I spun round really quick to see what it was. And the guy who I was with was like, no, ignore it, just look at me. Eventually, after 10 minutes or so, I'd calmed down and I felt a bit more like myself. So we rejoined the group next door. While we'd been gone, they'd been conducting an EVP session, and they'd picked up a voice saying hello. Very cool, very calm, very nice. It's just saying hello. We ran the timings and we estimated that the capturing of hello was the same time that we'd heard the growl in the room next door. And I genuinely believe that we'd both heard the same sound. But what had happened was our ears, the human perception, had picked up a frequency range that was outside of what we could perceive. So all we heard was this growl. Now, if you think about it, that's all I'm doing now. I'm basically barking at you. I'm making vibrational sounds coming out of my mouth. And they are barks. They're just noise until they hit your ear. And your ear takes them into your brain, which decodes those barks, those vibrations, into words. And it sounds like a language that you can understand. So we'd heard this bark, this growl, and we couldn't decode it. It wasn't on our frequency range. But the recorder, the EVP recorder, which can record on a higher and a lower range, had picked it up correctly, and it had picked it up as hello. Now, you think, how many times do we hear on investigations growls or horrible noises or grunts? And we always think, oh, that's evil, that's bad, that's nasty. Is it possible that it could just be someone trying to communicate with us on a much, higher or lower frequency range to what we can perceive? Therefore, we're hearing it a lot differently. And when we use equipment, as I talk about, that can open up a whole new world, such as EVP recorders, we can actually determine what they're trying to say to us a lot easier. They're just saying hello. And it was a really fascinating experience. And again, it just ticked a box for me to say, look, you're on the right path here. The connection that you're putting together here is quite right. Now, another experiment that we did was we had EMF emitters in a room. It's just about the same size as your average living room. And we were pumping out EMF into this room, high range, low range, just pumping it out, filling it with EMF. And we had the usual, the K2 meter, the EMF meters. We had the REM pods. We had walkie-talkies, tuning them into all the frequencies that we were pumping out to see if anything was operating on those ranges. We didn't get a thing, not a thing at all. And After about 15 minutes or so, I was quite frustrated because I was like, look, I was expecting something here and we got nothing. So we went around, turned it all off, turned all the equipment off. Within seconds of doing that, we'd had footsteps, we had people being touched, the K2 meter went massive, right up to red, the REM pod was going crazy, something was in the room. And I believe what we'd done is we'd blocked this spirit interacting with us on its own frequency by filling it with other frequencies. So I always say, if you're at a party at a house and you go to the kitchen and there's too many people, you think I'll come back in a minute. I think that's what happened here. I think the spirit came to us and to come into the room to interact with us and couldn't get in. We blocked it with these frequencies. And as soon as we turned this equipment off and emptied it of these frequencies, in it came. And again, it was just another big tick for me. That's another, the theory that you're onto here is spot on. And then you compare this to other paranormal experiences. So now we take that and we're talking about spirits here and what people call ghosts. And we're moving now into the realm of UFOs and aliens and Bigfoot and cryptozoological creatures and all this stuff. How many experiences have you heard of where people say they watched Bigfoot walk behind a tree, but he didn't come out the other side? Or people say, well, yeah, I saw the UFO. It was floating right above me and it didn't go anywhere. I didn't blink. It just disappeared. We hear of this all the time. We hear about how people are being abducted by aliens and they're taken through their roof. They're taken through their ceiling. So it's a solid ceiling. They float up. They go through the roof. No damage to themselves or to the roof, up into the spaceship. Now, I would argue, because they are now operating on a frequency range where that roof doesn't exist. That roof is no longer there. We've all watched The Matrix, and it's very similar to that, really. The guy the little child who says, try not to bend the spoon, really. Just realise that there is no spoon. And ultimately, that's what it is. And Bigfoot, when they say he didn't come out the other side of the tree, I believe he did, but you're just not tuned into that frequency anymore. So I always say when you're in a car and you have your radio station on and something might mess up and you might have a crossover of frequencies and all of a sudden you can listen to two stations at once and then it fixes itself and you go back to listening to your original station. That's what happens. So all of a sudden your frequency range messes up. You see Bigfoot, he goes behind a tree or whatever and doesn't come out the other side. But he does. You're not tuning into that anymore. The UFO that just disappears in front of you doesn't disappear, it's still there, but you're just not tuning into it anymore. So with that being said, does that mean we're living in a world where Bigfoot could be sat next to me right now? Or there could be a spaceship right above me, or an alien grey in the very same room that I am? We just can't see him. I would argue, yes. I would argue that all of this is going on around us. And we're just not perceiving it. And that's why we get so many experiences. And the more research I've done, the more I think they're all connected. They are all connected together. And by that I mean, if we strip away the hologram, this holographic universe, this matrix, and we get right down to the coding of it, I believe that every kind of, paranormal experience that we have is the same. It's the same piece of coding. But what's happening is we're manifesting it a different way, depending on our beliefs. So I always say, and again, apologies for anyone that's heard this before, but if you're religious, you always see the Virgin Mary. If you want to go ghost hunting, if you believe in ghosts, you will always see a ghost. If you're a UFO believer, you will always see UFOs. And I think what's happening is anytime the veil lifts and our perception opens up to these new frequencies for a short period of time or for however long it is, the experience that we have, we're manifesting onto it our own beliefs and our own wants and needs. I've had people come on ghost hunts whose brother has, recently died, or they've lost a friend or a mom, and really they come and they say they can hear their mom, or they can hear their brother, or they can hear someone calling their name, and it sounds like them. Now, it's not for me to say that that's not true. If they've experienced it, they've experienced it. And if they're lying, well, that's up to them. But if they're not, and if they're telling the truth, then what a fascinating experience for them. Well, what that shows again is they're experiencing this paranormal situation, this coding that I talk of, but they're just manifesting their own experiences, their own beliefs, their own wants and needs onto it, and that's what they're getting back, which is ultimately what this is all about. We hear of the law of attraction, we hear of all this stuff, and you put out what you get back. And it's so true, even on a very low level. If you wake up in a bad mood, everything's going to go wrong. You go outside, it's raining. Oh, great, it's raining. Really, you get in your car, it's a bad day. You get to work, it's a bad day because you've woke up in a bad mood. So what you're putting out, you're getting back. Now, there could be other days where you wake up in a fantastic mood and you go outside and it's raining. Oh, great, it's raining. I needed to water my garden and the car needed a bit of a clean. Fantastic, it's raining. So there's always two options. There's always two ways to look at life. And you can take that a lot deeper and genuinely think, what you're putting out is what you're going to get back. And I really do believe that. I'm just going to go through some questions and have a drink. I've been talking a long time there. It doesn't look like Eric's going to show up. I haven't had any. Just check my emails and stuff. Haven't had anything from him. No. So let's just go through what people have been saying. Sorry, guys. I went off on one a bit there. Gary, have you noticed over the last few years the amount of satellites have found new black holes out there in the universe? So the exploring side of pushing satellites are going to new levels and boundaries. Do you feel there's more to find out there in the universe? I believe what's out there in the universe is exactly what's inside us. We are the universe. And I always found it interesting, though, on a more physical level, how we've actually explored more of space than we have of our own seas, of our own oceans. It's a very small percentage that we've actually explored beneath our oceans. And of course, we have things such as USOs, which is we have an unidentified flying object, and we have an unidentified submerged object, which is a USO. Christopher Columbus claimed to have seen a USO while he was on his way to discover America. So there's plenty of stories about that. Does that mean these race of aliens, extraterrestrials or just terrestrials, are living beneath the ocean, inside the Earth, maybe? So much evidence to suggest that that's right. But yeah, there's so much out there to explore. But there's such a dark side to that, Gary, that I probably don't have time to go into now. What's Ian saying? Hadn't thought about it like that before. That's very interesting. Yeah, Ian. If you tune into this show often, or if you tune into my Paranormal Paradigm podcast, I do tend to go into a bit more detail about this. Obviously, I'm kind of trying to make this as brief as possible, really, so I can talk about several subjects. But yeah, what else do we have? We have several comments. Wow. Irene, all the way from Japan. There's a legend that in February we throw soya beans at the devil that lives in the mountains and takes your children away. We call it Setsu Bun, where we throw dried soybeans and the devil to cast them out. Oh, it carries on. To cast them out of your house. Wow. I've always been fascinated with these. So when you look at stuff like this, these kind of ancient, I guess, celebrations and rituals, there's always got to be something in it. There's got to be something to it. Because there's always a grain of truth to everything. And as I spoke of earlier, with the angels depicted with wings, it was just, in my opinion, older generations trying to tell us that these things could fly. That was the only way they could tell us. But there's so much more to it than that. I've always been fascinated with how all this links. And when we look at things like, again, going slightly off topic here, but I was talking to the wife earlier about Christmas, and I'm not a big Christmassy type person. I don't believe in the commercialization of it, and Santa only really visits rich kids. He doesn't visit the poor kids. So I'm not really a big believer in that. But I guess when you look at the history of Christmas and what it links to, it's a fascinating subject. Because, well, you go back to the Roman times and they used to celebrate Saturnalia. And I'm just going to message Karen. Sorry about the whole mix-up. It looks like we've got Eric on, but I'm only really available for the next 15 minutes, so I don't know if there's really any point. Right, sorry guys. So we'll pull Eric in, but this will be very, very brief. We'll introduce him and we'll try and line up for another show. So here we go. Hi, Eric.
Good afternoon or good evening, whatever time you are.
Yeah, it's good evening. Well, glad to have you on. Unfortunately, I am really kind of time restrained. I have got to shoot off in 15 minutes or so. But I thought, we'd use these 15 minutes just to introduce you, really, and then we could maybe get another show going, and we'd get longer of the show then, because it would be less introducing and more talking about the topic. So
absolutely. I want to apologize for being late. I misread your email and thought I was supposed to be here at my time 4:00, but it's actually your time. My time 3:00 and your time 8:00. So
it's fine. It's that we have it all the time. I do another show that's pre-recorded, and I was saying to the viewers that it's so much easier when it's pre-recorded, because you can make mistakes like this, and it doesn't really matter. So I have kind of introduced you, and I've told them about yourself and given them a biography of yourself. I guess really for me because we're in Britain here, and we don't get much of these cryptozoological creatures. We don't get much. We get escaped lions roaming the countryside and stuff like that. That's about as big as we go. But in America, it's quite a big deal. Bigfoot, it's quite I guess he ranks quite high in terms of not necessarily paranormal experiences, but out there experiences.
Yeah, he's probably, as far as cryptids go, he's probably king of the cryptids, the most recognized monster, if you will, among us here in the States. I know in over in England and Eastern Europe and some of the Western Europe countries, they have the woodwose or the wild man, and there are sightings that occur around the country and around the countryside. They're not as popular as seen as often as they are here in the United States. But yeah, there are a lot of sightings over here in North America, Canada, even into South America, in Mexico. But yeah, you guys have your share of the woodwose sightings and wild men sightings over in England and Ireland, Scotland, and those countries like that.
Okay, I mean, maybe just because I always look for the word Bigfoot and I don't really look for the terminology that we seem to be giving it over here. Now, I guess for you, someone who's really deep into the Bigfoot, can I call it mythology, or for some, it's. Do you see that there's been trends with sightings of Bigfoot? Do you tend to see from back in because we tend to get that in the paranormal world, with UFOs and stuff like that. There are big trends where everybody experiences something, then it goes really quiet, and then it comes up again. Do you have that in the Bigfoot field?
Yeah, we do see that from time to time. There are some years that we get an enormous amount of sightings, and I don't know if it's because of media influence or pop culture influence, or if it's the flavor of the day, if you will. We do see them. Some years we get a lot more sightings than others, and some years are slow years or dry years, as we call them. We'll still get sighting reports, but not on the level as we do the popular years. I know with my 20 plus years of experience in investigating, I've seen years where we've had 30, 40 sightings in my area, and then a couple of years later we'll get 5 or 6. So we do see trends like that happen, and I don't know really what the cause of it is. Maybe, like I said, it could be dealt with the media, them really publicizing it and really putting it out for the public to see, or if their people just aren't out in the woods. I know with the COVID crisis this past year, we've seen a real decrease in sightings. I mean, people they're just not leaving their homes, and we've seen a lot more wildlife encroaching neighborhoods and populated areas because people aren't out and about like they usually are. So the sightings this year, I can say, have greatly decreased, but I'm sure as more people start to get out once the COVID crisis is over and people get back to a normal life, they're going to get back out in the woods and recreation, camping, fishing, hunting, all that stuff, and we may see the sightings go back up again. So
now, with these sightings, something that's always fascinated me, again, it crosses the whole of the paranormal range, because I know you obviously research paranormal as well. Mm-hmm. The big problem for me is we never really get very clear evidence. We never really get. It's always it's a shaky camera, or they look like they're filming on a potato, or it's are really far off. You can barely make out what it is. Is there a reason for this, or is there a reason? Have you ever seen anything that's? I guess it's two questions. Is there a reason for that being like it is, and have you ever seen evidence that is better than that?
Well, there's a running joke that's been around for a while. A comedian once said that Bigfoot himself is naturally blurry. That's why we can never get a clear picture of him. But in all seriousness, I don't know the reason why we can't get clear, high definition video. I think a lot of it has to do with people and the shock factor, where if they are particularly looking for the creature, they're not really expecting to see it. They're hoping to see it. And then when they do see it, they're kind of shocked. Like, oh my gosh, let me get my camera up. By the time they get their camera up or their cell phone up or whatever, their hands are shaking. They're nervous. They're excited. So it's not stabilized, solid film footage. And let's be honest, a lot of the researchers who go out there aren't taking the best high definition cameras out there.
No.
So they're relying on cell phones and camcorders, maybe a GoPro camera, that sort of thing. And sometimes the video footage on that is not bad, but unless you have it stabilized, you're focused on what you're shooting, you're going to get a shaky, grainy, blurry video or picture. And you have to also keep in mind that these sightings aren't like Bigfoot's not going to stand there and pose for you. He's not going to be like, hey, he's going to be like, oh my gosh, and take off and run or come at you, whatever the situation is. So you only have a few seconds to react, get that camera up, focus, and hope that it stays stabilized and steady. So therefore, there aren't a lot of those pictures. I think the closest one to answer your second part of the question, the clearest one, I really think is the Patterson-Gimlin film that everybody's familiar with from 1967. That minute footage on a 16 millimeter camera, keep in mind, that shows a creature walking across a sandbar in Bluff Creek, California, Northern California. And that, if you remember that video at all, the first maybe 30 seconds of it are shaky, really bad, and it's not crystal clear. That's because Roger fell off his horse, and his first thought was, oh my gosh, I got to get this camera stabilized. So he got the camera out, and he's running at the creature, trying to film it. And as you can see in the film, the camera's bouncing like this the whole time. So finally, he falls down on a log, stabilizes the camera, and gets about maybe 30, 40 seconds of the creature walking, doing that famous head turn when it looks back and walks off into the trees. So even that footage itself isn't stabilized and isn't clear. But of all the film footage that we've captured over the past 40, 50 years, that's probably the clearest I've seen.
So judging from that kind of account you've just given there, you're a believer in that, because there are so many people that call that a hoax, that say that that's fake. And I've seen documentaries where they have people study the video, study that, the way it's filmed. And I have always kind of gone on the side of, I think it's real. Obviously you think it's real. Is there a reason that you think it's real? Have you, because obviously you talk to these people, you're in this field. Have you managed to speak to these guys? Have you managed to hear things that we haven't when we just watch a video?
Yeah, I actually know Bob Gimlin very well. I became friends with him over the years and found him to be a very credible, genuine, honest person. I don't think he's lying about the film. He wasn't the one that actually shot the film. It was Roger Patterson who did. He was on horseback with a 30-06 rifle pointed at the creature as it walked away. So talking to him, and he even admits he could have been hoaxed. There was a period of time during that morning where Roger was away from camp. So he admits it possibly could have been a hoax, but if it was a hoax, it was a very good one, because as he watched the creature walk away, he could see muscle definition, muscles flexing and moving up and down. And it was just such a fluid, normal looking gait to the creature, like it was walking normally. And we all know, and you probably know this from experience, Halloween time comes around, you put a Halloween mask on or any kind of mask over your eyes, you always have to look down to see where you're walking, because you don't want to trip and fall. So you're always kind of correcting your line of walk. Yeah. And in the film, the creature doesn't do that. It always has its head turned straight, and except when it turns back and looks at them, but it continues to walk straight. And at the film site, there was a flood that had come into that area just prior to those guys getting there and filming. So there's a lot of logs and branches, rocks, and dips and divots in the ground. So it would have been very unstable ground for that thing to be walking on. Do I think it's real? I think there's a good possibility that it's real, but I'm still on the fence about it, because the only people that were there were Roger and Bob. Yeah. It's the only two people who were there. And unfortunately, Roger passed away in the early 70s due to cancer. Bob is still around, and I find him very credible and believable. So I believe he says, what he saw was the real thing, but I wasn't there, so I can't honestly say if it's the real thing or not.
Now, I'd heard, and I don't know if this is true or not. I went to watch an English cryptozoologist, and just went to watch one of his lectures, and he said that shortly after this, they obviously the film stops, but there was a baby Bigfoot or a smaller Bigfoot that the one that they'd filmed went over to. Is that true? Have you heard of that?
I've heard of people speculate on that. The film doesn't end right there at where the creature's seen walking into the tree line and disappearing. They come back and film some of the footprints, and they film them actually making casts of the footprints. So they show that. There's a few researchers that have suggested that there might have been a baby or a smaller one in the bushes, that when Patty walks away, the reason she walks away from them in a certain direction is in hopes that it will draw them away from a smaller creature that might have been there. We have no physical proof. I mean, people have looked at the film and tried to point out shadows and different blurry areas and say there's a small one there, there's a baby infant one there, but there's really no proof that there was. It's just a lot of speculation and theory.
Yeah, and for yourself, obviously, years, decades of research for yourself. Have you ever managed to gain evidence such as this? Have you had a sighting yourself?
I've never seen an actual creature. I've heard some really compelling things in the forest that make your hair stand on end, that is not a coyote or a bobcat or a bear or a common wildlife. And I've seen footprints, very clear, defined footprints that definitely have toes in them, that are much larger than a human's foot would be. And logically, why somebody would be out there bare feet in that area of the forest makes no sense. So I've seen some things that are pretty compelling that convinced me that there's something going on out there. Personally, talking to the hundreds of eyewitnesses I've talked to over the years, they're seeing something, they're experiencing something. So that continues to motivate me and drive me to continue to try to find out what exactly they're experiencing and seeing.
Now, you talk about these sounds, and of course everyone, most people have watched programs such as Finding Bigfoot and all of this stuff. And I did interview a guy called Ron Meyer. I don't know if you've ever come across Ron. I've interviewed him on my other podcast. Do you know Ron?
The name's familiar. I know a Ron Murphy. And
no, it was Meyer. I think it was spelled.
I don't know Ron personally. I know the name.
Yeah.
There's so many people in this field.
Yeah. It's the same with the ghost. People say to me, "Do you know him or her?" No, never heard of them. But I mean, really, when I interviewed him, he spoke about this. He spoke about the sounds and the noises that you get, and I think he had something to do with working on Finding Bigfoot. And we hear what they call the knocks, the wood knocks, are they? And these really, as you described it, like they're like bellows. They're such loud calls that aren't a bear. They don't sound like a bear. They don't sound like a coyote. To be out in the forest to hear that when I guess you're on your own, or do you feel really vulnerable at that point? Do you feel quite scared?
When I first started this years ago, hearing something that I couldn't explain was rather intimidating, and it got me a little unnerved. Now I hear it, I get excited. I jump up and I want to go chasing through the woods after that sound. It's probably foolish to do so because you don't know what's out there, but I get an adrenaline rush, really excited to hear it. And I want to get out there and find out what's making that sound more than I am afraid of it. I've come across bear and coyote and other animals that they usually run the other way, so I'm not too worried about them. But there's always that element of danger that you have to deal with when in the outdoors. So I don't suggest people chase after sounds that they don't know what they are, unless they're armed or in a group of people. They're going to be safe. But I don't get afraid of them anymore now.
No. And what's the closest you would say you've ever been to one? So when you hear these sounds or these wood knocks, and just for the viewers, the wood knocks, I guess, people say that's how they communicate with each other through this kind of thing. When you've heard these, as you say you have you ever been really close and you think, wow, I didn't think they've snuck up on me a bit there. I didn't realize they were that close. What would you say is the closest you've been? Yeah,
several times that's happened, probably within 30 to 50 feet. I've had several knocks that were unsolicited. It wasn't me knocking, trying to get them to knock back. I was just sitting, out in the forest with a fellow researcher, and we were just kind of quietly talking amongst each other. And then all of a sudden, 50 feet away, there are two loud, crisp knocks, no denying what they were. And we didn't hear anybody come in. We didn't hear anybody go out. It was at night, of course, but it was so close that, I mean, I've literally could have reached out and touched whatever was doing it. So I've had that happen on several occasions where they've been very, very close. They've snuck in very quietly. You don't see them, you don't hear them until there's that crack on the tree, and it catches your attention pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I guess for such big creatures as well, because obviously we have seen videos and people have given eyewitness accounts, these things can be 8 feet tall, 8.5 feet tall. I guess they must move quietly, I can't walk on carpet without making a sound, really. My knees are clicking or my ankles are clicking. So they must move really quietly. Do you ever get that impression? Because I guess when you're in the dark, in the forest, like, again, when we're in the dark hunting ghosts, you always know if someone's sat next to you, if someone walks in the room, you just feel that change of energy. A physical person, not a spirit. Do you ever feel that? Do you ever feel that there's something there, even though you might not be able to see it?
Yeah, it's one of the great mysteries about this is that they are able to move around in the dark, especially in a forest, moving in and around trees, fallen logs, branches, without making noise. That's baffling. So they really must have good eyesight at night and be able to maneuver very quickly and quietly without us hearing them. There have been times where you can feel a presence approach in the forest, like there's something there, that feeling almost like you're being watched. But you look around and with flashlights or thermal cameras, you don't see anything, but for sure something there's watching you. That's happened a couple of times too.
Okay. Sorry, I've got a message from the wife. She said we can carry on for a bit. Great.
Oh, good.
No, it's because I've got we have a 1-year-old upstairs in bed, and of course it's 9 o'clock here now, so it's kind of like she wants to go to bed and wind down. But
sure.
No, she's after something, I think. It's coming up to Christmas. She wants a present.
Well, let her know. I let her know I won't keep you too much longer.
No. Now she's done that, right? We can go for another 2 hours. So, really, for me, the fascination of Bigfoot, because you obviously don't know much about myself, but my own research into the paranormal has looked at it from, and I was talking just before you came on, about the nature of reality and about how I believe that spirit beings operate on different frequency levels. Now, there is a lot of talk, and there is a line of thought within your field that Bigfoot might not necessarily be flesh and blood, and he might be this interdimensional being, and he's witnessed at the same sightings that UFOs are witnessed or alien abductees are taken. There always seems to be a correlation between the two. Do you follow that line of thought, or is that something you're against?
Well, I'm very open-minded. I feel as a researcher and an investigator, I have to keep an open mind and explore all the possibilities. You can't rule something out just because you don't follow that path of research or that possibility. So I keep an open mind. I've talked to many people over the years who have had experiences that aren't your normal animal experience, one-on-one sighting or an encounter. I've talked to several people that have claimed they've watched the creature just physically dematerialize right in front of them. And we all know that no animal on this planet has that ability to do. So there's obviously something that this animal has, a physical capability that we don't understand or comprehend, or is maybe possibly an alien from another planet, a multi-dimensional being where it has ability to shift in and out of dimensions. I can't rule any possibility out at this point because logically thinking, after 50 or 60 years of many researchers, not just myself, but many researchers doing this type of field research and spending time in the forest, thousands of eyewitness sightings, the scant evidence that we don't have a physical live or dead specimen to present to science. So there's something about this mystery that keeps it intriguing, whether it's that multidimensional theory, an alien extraterrestrial creature theory. It has abilities we just can't comprehend. I don't know. So I keep an open mind when it comes to this creature and trying to explore all possibilities. Again, I've talked to very rational eyewitnesses and people who've seen these things, claim they've seen these things, and they'll say, I was driving down the road, my high beams hit this thing standing on the left side of the road. You lose that light ambience coming from the binoculars, and everything looks more and more grainy. So I tend not to use those, but I stick to basically a body camera or a GoPro camera, a small digital audio recorder. So if I hear something, I can capture it. My thermal FLIR and either my monocular or binoculars, depending on the situation.
Okay, that's fascinating because it kind of mirrors my journey. You know, when I first started out, I had a bag full of stuff. You know, everything that you see the ghost hunters on TV using, you think, oh, I'm going to go and cost you a bomb, but you go and get it all. And now the best piece of equipment for me is my body. You know, kind of my own personal experiences. It's a lot cheaper, and you don't have to carry a big bag of equipment around with you. So it's interesting how it mirrors really in different fields. Do you find that there's been so many videos, I guess, of fake bodies, fake dead bodies that are clearly fake? Does that annoy you? Do you find that gives a bad, shines a bad light on the field? Because we have it in all sorts of, ghosts. We have really bad faked videos. Same with aliens. And what I find is that makes the general public, Joe Smith, kind of look at that and go, well, it's all rubbish then. Do you find it discredits all of the hard work that you do when somebody decides to make a really badly faked video?
Well, it's funny you bring that up because I'm sure this happens, and I know from friends that are paranormal researchers and UFO researchers, we're our own worst critics. We're very harsh on the evidence that we see and we investigate, we look at. So I see a lot of these videos that are released to the general public, and we're the first ones to jump out there and say, nope, that's garbage, that's fake. Because if I know in 2008 there was the whole big debacle with the Bigfoot in the freezer.
Yes,
from Georgia. The two Georgia boys claimed they killed found a dead Bigfoot, put it in a body, or put it in a freezer. It was frozen with ice, and they were on CNN and all these major news outlets taunting about, oh, look, we found a dead Bigfoot. Well, if you go back and look at some of these interviews, they talked to Bigfoot researchers, and all these Bigfoot researchers were saying, nope, that's a hoax.
Yeah.
Clearly a hoax. So we were our own worst critics when it comes to these videos and films and dead bodies. We'll be the first to jump up there and say, hey, no, that's not legit. On the other hand, though, if we feel that it's something legitimate and it's worth really investigating, we're going to say, hey, we don't know what this is, but we think it deserves a better, closer look. As far as what's out there on YouTube and all the different TikTok and all the different social media outlets, as far as videos of people seeing Bigfoot or capturing them on film, I'd say 98% of them are garbage.
Yeah.
And that's just my personal opinion. They're just horrible. And you really can't discern what's in them other than a blur, a flash. We call them blob squatches. And yeah, that's all they are. It's just a blob in the forest, and you can't make out what they are. But people profess and swear that it's a Bigfoot. Well, it's not going to prove that even if it was a very good video, it's not going to prove that it's a Bigfoot, because we all know that costumes are so great, and there's CGI and special effects. There's so many things out there that can really make it look authentic. So films, to me, I don't really pay much attention to them anymore because there's so many bad ones out there. So I just keep doing what I'm doing, pushing forward. And if somebody sends me a video, I'll be happy to take a look at it. If they send me a picture, I'll be happy to take a look at it. And I'll give you my honest opinion. I'm not going to sugarcoat and say, oh my gosh, that is a Bigfoot. Woo-hoo, you got a great catch. I'm going to be honest. If I don't think it's a Bigfoot, I'm going to tell you, I think you got something that's a little shady there. Yeah. I wouldn't put too much stock into it. But that's what you have to do when you're researching. You have to be honest and open with the witnesses and tell them from the start, okay, maybe you saw a Bigfoot, maybe you captured a Bigfoot on film, but from what I'm seeing, it doesn't look like a Bigfoot.
No, okay, that's a fair point. I just want to bring a question in here I've got from Terry Coops. Do you think I think this is going back to what we were talking about earlier, do you think some creatures are either shadow matter and move in between dimensions or live physically in this world?
Well, my personal belief is that they're not, although there are witnesses who claim to the contrary, that they do move through one world to another world. They disappear in front of them. We simply don't know at this point. And there's not enough evidence. There's not enough data collected to say that if there are shadow creatures. There's a variety of different cryptids and a variety of different creatures that are reportedly seen and experienced throughout the globe. That could be shadow creatures. We have the shadow people, obviously, in the paranormal world. Yep. There could be shadow creatures that have that ability to move from dimension to dimension, or to physically dissolve into nothingness and then come back from the shadows into a physical solid form. We just don't know. We don't have enough information at this point.
No, and when you talk about the cryptozoological, and these other kind of cryptids, does your research because obviously I've been on your website and seen what you do. You don't just kind of stick to Bigfoot, I assume. You do branch out and look into other types of cryptids. So do you ever get people contact you about other types? I mean, maybe Mothman or something like that. Do you ever get anyone talk to you about those kind of things?
I have. I've had other people reach out to me about other creatures they've seen, whether it's a mountain lion or a black panther that's reportedly seen here in Pennsylvania. It's not a common animal. Our natural law enforcement, the Department of Natural Resources, the DNR, they say they don't exist here, but people claim they see them. And they contact me to say, hey, I did see one, or I found tracks, or we heard one. The Mothman, we've gotten reports of people claiming they've seen a very large winged entity flying around through the skies. Unfortunately, with Mothman, much like Bigfoot, it's hard to gather any good solid evidence other than to take an eyewitness report, to write down their information and document it so that if you have future sightings, you can rely back on that report and say, okay, there was a sighting here in this year, and this is what they described, this is what this person's described, and they kind of match. We've gotten reports of something called a thunderbird, which is a very large bird, much larger than your typical hawk or eagle. We're talking a bird black in color, usually from the beak all the way back to its tail feathers, sometimes with a white ring around its neck, like a ring. Very large talons and a wingspan that can range in size from 8 feet as long as 20 feet, I've been told. Wow. And I've talked to several people over the years who've claimed they've seen this enormous bird that should not be there. It should not exist, flying over their car or their house or their backyard.
That's not a real bird then. That's not something that shouldn't be in that area at that time. It's just not a real creature.
Well, according to science, it should not exist. Yeah. It should not be there where they're seeing it, but there are people that are seeing it. And that's what a cryptid is. It's something that's not discovered or not proclaimed by scientists to be a real animal. It's considered a hidden or undiscovered animal. And that's what the thunderbird falls into, that category, is an undiscovered bird. And whether or not it's real, whether it could be, we talked about a shadow animal, maybe it could be a shadow animal coming from another dimension. There are people that actually, believe it or not, claim they see pterodons and pterodactyls flying around in the skies. They don't describe seeing leather or seeing feathers on the creature. They see like a leathery reptilian membrane on the creature. It looks like something out of the prehistoric age that should not exist, but yet they claim they've seen it and it was real to them. So we get all kinds of different creature sightings. One of the latest craze, and I'm sure you've heard about it, is the dog man.
Yes.
That's this upright walking canine creature that has the ability to walk and run on its hind legs. And it's very aggressive, and it looks much like a dog or a wolf type of some people call it a werewolf, but it looks very much like a wolf or canine, but has that ability to stand up on its hind legs and run. Now, you and I both know that dogs can stand up on their hind legs. They do when they beg for treats or they're excited to see you, but it's very rare that they're able to travel long distances on their back legs. Maybe in a circus, or maybe they've been trained specifically to do that for a short period of time, but to run as far as these people have been claiming they've seen them do and to maneuver with such grace and ability and agility, that's not common. But we're getting these dogman sightings quite frequently now.
Are they centralized to a particular area, or is that kind of nationwide?
It started up in Michigan and Wisconsin. Of course, I'm sure you've heard of the Beast of Bray Road. That's a very well-known cryptid, wolf-like, dogman-like creature that was seen on Bray Road in southwestern Wisconsin. I got to take a trip up there to see a good friend of mine who lives like 20 minutes from there. So we spent some time up on the Bray Road. And it started in those two general areas, but then since it's spread over to the eastern part of the country, New York has dogman sightings, getting down into Kentucky, Ohio, West Virginia, New York, they're having dogman sightings. So it's kind of like it's moving out, it's spreading out throughout the states. It's not just regionalized to Wisconsin or Michigan when it first started.
Okay, and we'll just kind of start to wrap up a bit now. Really glad that you did come on.
Me too.
It's a fascinating subject, and I'll try and get you on again, and we can go a little bit more into detail about the other side of your research, maybe a bit more into the paranormal side. But where do you see your research going now? What's your plans? Because when I talk about the future of paranormal. It's always in a negative way, and I don't mean it to be, but I talk about the evidence, as you say, and how things can be so easily faked now with CGI and Photoshop. And will we ever see a real piece of evidence again? And if we do, will we trust it? So, what do you believe is the future for Bigfoot research?
Well, from my aspect, I've given up trying to prove the animal's real. I don't think I'm ever going to be able to accomplish that. And I'm okay with that. I've come to terms with that simply because I don't have the manpower, resources, or time to devote what is needed to proving it. I'm more happy just having the personal experiences and talking to eyewitnesses to know that there's still something there, and to try to track down these leads to see if I can find tracks myself or have that personal experience or even a sighting. That's my ultimate goal. If I can have a sighting, that's closure for me. That helps me after 23 years of doing this, kind of put an end to it all, to bring a closure to these years of research, so that I know that what I've done, what I've looked to isn't in vain. It's actually had some meaning to it. I've come close. I think I've come close a couple of times. I can't say for certain, but my goal has switched from being, I want to prove this to the world, I want to prove this to science, that there's something there, people are seeing something and needs validated, to, okay, I know there's something out there. I know people are experiencing it. I know I'm not going to be able to physically prove it to the world until a body's brought in. But what I can do at this point is to continue to support the eyewitnesses and let them know they're not crazy, to try to help them understand what they've seen and collect data and information, so I can continue to build the database and maybe help another researcher. And in my own personal regards, is to possibly help me see a Bigfoot, to experience one for myself one day.
Okay, that's a fantastic answer. Because again, it mirrors myself so much. So where can our viewers find you? Obviously you have websites, you have contact information. We might have a viewer watching us now who has their own experience with Bigfoot, maybe, who wants to get in touch with you. How can they do so?
Well, I'm not on social media at the moment. I've taken a break from it. It's gotten to be too much.
Choice.
So, yeah, around election time here in the United States, I decided to take a big step away from social media. But people can find me on a couple of different websites. EricAltman.net. That's my personal website, and on that website you'll see different things, my research, media I've been involved with, books I've been involved with. Some of the photos I've collected over the years and contacts I've made, and it's just more of a wide-rounded look at the phenomenon I investigate. And then there's PABigfoot.com, which is for the Pennsylvania Bigfoot Society. It's a group that I run. I'm the director of the group, and we look into Bigfoot sightings. So if someone has a cryptid sighting or a Bigfoot sighting, they can go to that site and report it to us, and they can see some of our reports. We have a really cool section that has a map. It was done by one of our members, George Workman, where he's taken all the collective sightings in Pennsylvania and built them into a map where you can click on a pinpoint of that map and read about the sighting, the year, where it happened, stuff like that. And there's hundreds of them on the website. So a lot of good information on PABigfoot.com. And lastly, PACryptosociety.com. That's another group that I run, a smaller group that looks into all phenomenon of cryptid, not just Bigfoot, but the Dogman reports, the Mothman, the Thunderbirds that we talked a little bit about. So it looks into a wider variety of different cryptids. So there's 3 or 4 different ways that folks can find me if they're interested in getting in touch with me.
Okay, that's great. And I think we will definitely get you on again in the very near future. And we will focus a little bit more on that, a bit more on the other cryptid side of things as well, because again,
Sure.
That's another fascination of mine. But yeah, thank you for coming on. I know it's been a bit of an awkward one, really, and I've stayed a bit longer than, but yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on, and we'll speak again soon. So thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry again for the time mix-up. Next time we'll get it right, and I'm more than happy to come on and do a much longer, in-depth interview. We'll talk about a lot of different things. So it was a real pleasure meeting you, and thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Cheers, Eric. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.